The last time we were together, we had ended talking about fostering fondness and admiration. And fondness and admiration is the antidote to contempt or resentment. But in the same vein, when we talk about couples and having enduring relationships or divorce-proof relationships or lasting relationships, the thing that we really, really have to talk about is I feel like something that a lot of us misunderstand, and I'm not saying that I'm the guy that knows the answer to this, but let's talk about forgiveness tonight. So when I say the word forgiveness, does that give you angst, warm feelings, or confusion, or what? Angst. I read that on your face, by the way. So somebody tell me, why do we struggle with forgiveness? Your wife deserves a medal and there's stars in her crown and a sweater that lights up. What else? If you're in need of it, you want it, but if somebody else needs it, it's a little bit hard to dish out. Okay? What else? Okay, it's almost like you're admitting that you did something wrong and you don't want to admit you've done something wrong. So many times couples that are in trouble end up trying to be right rather than solve the problem. And once you get into that I'm right, you're wrong, I win, you lose mentality, you get into this cascade of negativity. And so people want to feel justified to be angry or resentful. And so it's almost like once I offer you forgiveness, it's like I give up my moral high ground to punish you or whatever. So Scotty says it's like you're worried about the balance of the relationship. Have I forgiven you more than you've forgiven me? And am I losing on this thing? One of the myths of marriages is that marriages are not quid pro quo. Now, theoretically, they should be, but they don't have to be. Your behavior doesn't dictate my behavior. I treat you the way I treat you because of my value system, period. Because you're rude doesn't mean I get to be rude. Because you're selfish doesn't mean I get to be selfish. Because you're dishonest doesn't give me permission to be dishonest. Your behavior is not a prerequisite for my behavior. And so a lot of times we start thinking of, well, if I forgave you, then you should forgive me. Well, there's some people who can forgive, and then these other people can't. Well, I forgave you, why can't you forgive me? That's just not the way the world works. And so anytime you're involved in interpersonal dynamics, and what you do feels like you're giving in or giving up rather than just giving, somebody's keeping score. And typically the person who's keeping score is the person who feels like they're losing, especially in marriages because you're building up a bank account of resentment. And we talk about making investments into a love account, or you can make investments into a resentment account. And both of those will pay dividends depending on what you make the most contributions to. So what else about forgiveness troubles us? Okay, sometimes it's hard to forget. So let's find some operational definitions. Does forgiving somebody mean that what they did was okay? Does forgiving somebody mean that what they did didn't hurt? Does forgiving somebody mean that I'm not allowed to feel bad about it anymore? So what is the true understanding of forgiveness? Okay, one, you don't keep bringing it up. It's got to remain in the unfinished business, not talked about category. And it really is, when you start thinking about it, forgiveness or lack of forgiveness is that thing that keeps us anchored to regrettable events in the past rather than allowing us to live in the present. And if we can't be comfortable in the present, it's hard to picture the future. But if I'm stuck in this, well, you hurt me, or you neglected me, or you took advantage of me, then I'm always stuck back here, and I can't live here. And there's lots of situations where couples have been, and I'm not saying, it didn't hurt and it wasn't wrong and it should have been done, but couples can't get past this regrettable event, and it colors the entire future of their lives simply because they want to stay stuck in this thing that hurt me. And do you have to be unhurt to forgive someone? Okay. So Celine says, if you're not hurt, you don't need to forgive. So you can't expect to forgive to give up the hurt. Otherwise, it's a moot point, I guess. And a lot of times I find that dynamic to be true, that people have trouble forgiving other people because they can't forgive themselves. And some people will come to the idea that it can't be this easy. I've done this terrible, horrible thing. How can they just go, okay, we'll get past it? We like to suffer more than that a lot of times. We'll talk about dealing with our own sin and us maybe later, but I really do want to talk about how one person is hurt, or one person is damaged, or one person at least it has a perception that they were treated badly, and they just can't seem to let it go and get past it. And what's the antidote for that? Is forgiveness an attitude, or is it an emotion? It could have some qualities of both, and I don't think we typically talk about forgiveness as an emotion, but we talk about feeling like forgiving somebody or feeling forgiven, and we talk about it in emotional terms. So, what's that? It's an attitude. So, I really think that when you start talking about, does it still hurt? Does it still bother me? But I'm not going to bring it up. It's basically making a decision that I'm going to treat you as if you were forgiven. Does that make sense? If you just simply go home and say, I'm going to treat my spouse like I loved them when we first got married. I'm going to treat my spouse as if we were newly dating. Remember the stuff you put up with and the stuff you did when you were dating? Everybody been married so long you can't remember that? Remember the ridiculous stuff you did? You spend 4 hours on a date, go home, get on the phone, and talk for another 2 hours? Right? Some of us used to actually write letters. We couldn't just tell Siri to send a note. We'd have to get out a piece of paper and write stuff. Send it off. I'm sorry. Yeah, or send an email and give an answer a week later. I'm not touching that at all. There's some baggage attached to that. I'm not. So when you start talking about forgiveness, I think there's got to be a choice that says, hey, I made a promise to love you, cherish you, honor you in what? Sickness and better, or, oh wow. So you've behaved worse. And I made a promise that I'm still going to honor, love, and cherish you, not because it feels like that's what I want to do, but because it's what I promised to do. And so when forgiveness becomes an attitude, and anytime I think about something as an attitude, in the back of my mind, that always means choice. I get to choose to do this and treat you as if you were forgiven. My wife is waving at me, so I'm going to stop and see what she has to say. One more time. Yes. Okay. Okay, so let me ask you this, and you'll have to decide if you think this is a valid construct or not. Uh, Gottman talks about interpersonal forgiveness versus intrapersonal forgiveness. Now, I have a little trouble defining that as well as Mr. Gottman does. So I talk about it in terms of Christianity. When God forgives, He always reconciles. Every time God forgives, you get reconciliation. The relationship is restored to the exact same place that it was. I believe it is possible for us to forgive without reconciliation. Now, I don't think that's helpful in a marriage, but I think in other cases, you can forgive without reconciliation. Now, I probably can't defend that in a debate with Ralph Gilmore, but you think about things that happen. If I loan Kevin my truck, and Kevin wraps it around a pole, and I don't sue him, I don't sue his insurance company, and we repair my truck, and we're friends. And Kevin says, hey, man, can I borrow your truck again? I forgave him, and I throw him the keys. Forgiveness and reconciliation, right? I loan Kevin my truck. Kevin wraps it around the pole. I don't sue him. I don't sue his insurance company. We fix my truck. We do good. Kevin says, hey, are we still friends? Yeah, we're still friends. Hey, Lonnie, can I borrow your truck? Where are you moving? Safe. When? Monday. I'll be at your house at 4. Is he forgiven? But is there reconciliation? He still has access to my truck. He just ain't driving it. And I think that's a thing that humans can do. Now, I think if you start doing it at those levels inside a marriage, you fractured the marriage. Because, I'm married to this person and I don't trust them. I don't think that's sustainable. If I had to dive deep into why Jesus says that's the only reason you can divorce and remarry is for sexual immorality, I believe it boils down to the trust factor. That a woman who has been cheated on or a man who's been cheated on, you can't maintain intimacy without trust. And if there's a flavor of selfishness in your marriage that this person will choose themselves over me, then you've compromised the foundation that it takes to build the relationship. And I think that's why the Lord made it an exception. Did I answer your question? Did I answer it enough? Yes. Okay, all right. So, when I decide, okay, this person has broken my trust, and I'm going to reinvest my trust into them, why are we hesitant to do that? I don't want to get burned again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Okay. What else? You start putting walls up, you start putting barriers up, you start losing that intimacy connection and start separating. What else? You don't want to feel like a fool. Hey, this has happened to me once. I don't want it to happen again. When I give you my trust and you betray it, does that say more about me or more about you? I'll ask it again for the Auburn fans. When I give you my trust and you betray it, does that say more about me or more about you? Yeah. Trust is this valuable and sometimes fragile thing that I go, I'm going to let you hold this for a while. Now, if he breaks it, am I an idiot for giving it to him? It says more about him than it does about me. Now, there may be some times when you're dealing with a dysfunction, a personality disorder, somebody who's addicted, somebody who's got some substance abuse issues, and you just keep reinvesting that valuable thing into them. There may be some dysfunction going on there. But in general terms, assuming we got the bell curve of relationships, what you do with my trust is on you, not me. Hey, I give a homeless dude $20. What he does with that $20 is on him. What I do with my $20 is on me. I don't know if he's legit. I don't know if he's an angel. I don't know what's going on. And I give a lot of money away. and I probably know better. But what you do with my money is between you and God. What I do with my money is between me and God. And so sometimes I buy food and give groceries and do things for people, and I don't have to vet their story. I've got this opportunity and I've got this responsibility, so I do that. Same thing with trust, is I'm going to give you my trust and then decide what you want to do with it. Now, I think in some cases that has an expiration date. I think you break my trust so many times, sometimes you can't glue it back together. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well, I think all I'm saying is about responsibility. I'm going to trust you. Now, what you do with my trust is on you, not on me. That's as far as that illustration needs to go. That which proves too much proves too little. So don't read more into it than I meant. I didn't mean to make this huge apples to apples comparison. That make sense? Yes, maybe. Okay. Was that clear, Jackie? So in that context in 1 Peter, it says, likewise, wives, likewise compared to what? Christ on the cross, slaves to masters, and men with civil government. So there's an expectation of submission out of Christianity.
I think that's why we're back to the other point you made, is that's why that's the out.
Okay.
I'm telling you right now, that would be an out. Because, like you said, Brother Clement, if you break that trust from like sexual infidelity, they will not be able to breach that.
And I've seen it happen both ways. In 25 years of private practice, I've seen way more couples involved in affairs that stayed together than divorced, which may be shocking to you. And what you'll find when couples are involved with infidelity, if I see 100 couples and the male has been guilty of sleeping with somebody else, one of those women, her complaint will be, I can't believe he slept with her. 99% of those women will say, I can't believe he lied to me. He said he was going here. He said he would be there. He said he was working late. And it's not the sex, it's the lie that ends the marriage. And so, yeah, that breach of trust is really, really huge. And I think that's why the Lord gave that as an exception. Right. Or if you married them, you were looking at red flags and ignoring them. And the biggest marker for that is selfishness. And when we are initially dating, we are very selfless. It's like we pour into the relationship and empty ourselves, and then after a couple of months or years, some people get lax on that and their selfishness rises. Well, the greater selfishness is present in a relationship, the less trust is present. Well, as soon as there's been a big breach in trust, then all the selfishness monsters come out of the closet and you can see how many horns they have. And then it's very easy to look back at the history and look at all the things that said, hey, this person's selfish, and I never recognized it. And then it's very, very hard to embrace that again because there's just this scariness. And then there's that residual pain of I've been hurt this bad and I don't want to be hurt again. But if we can't get past regrettable events, you can't move into the future of your relationship. And so we talk about fondness and admiration being the antidote for contempt. Learning to forgive is part of that, being able to look at the future of the relationship and not let it be clouded by the past of the relationship. Does that make sense? Yes. And like Barry said, you build that up over years, you build that up over months, you kind of have this testing period. And if you get into that stage where you're infatuated rather than in love, then you ignore some of those things. I think we do this thing with one of the classes that I teach on de-escalation. If I ask you if you're suicidal, and I don't ever ask, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because a person who's going to kill themselves thinks their pain will be over, so that in their mind it's not going to hurt. And I don't ask them, are you thinking about doing something stupid? Because in their mind it's a logical solution to their problem. So I always ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about murdering yourself? If I ask you that and you hesitate, the answer is yes, you've thought about it. That make sense? You don't think about killing yourself, are you? Nah. No, that's a yes. Okay, I'm calling 911, all right? Same thing if I ask you, do you trust your boyfriend or your girlfriend? I get this couple in the office, and he's not been where he's supposed to be, and he's supposed to go camping, but he was drinking with his buddies, or he's supposed to be drinking with his buddies, and he was with his ex-girlfriend, and you ask the girl, do you trust this young man? That's a yes or no question. Do you trust this fella? Yes. But if you get, do you trust this fella? Well, he's sweet. He's handsome. No, don't marry the fool. You don't trust him, because that's a yes or no. It's a binary situation. So when you start thinking about, do I trust this person, and you have to hesitate, then you need to talk to your spouse about what it is we can do to repair the ability to implicitly and explicitly trust each other. And if we ever can get to the place where we rebuild the trust, then we've automatically fixed forgiveness. Do you agree with that? So the formula for that is how much selfishness can we eliminate from the relationship. Because you look at all the bad things that occur in relationships, I think you can boil down most of them that there's a motivation of selfishness. We wouldn't have done what we did because we were thinking about us, not the other person. Even to the point of an affair, because people are like, I was walking around in a cloud. I wasn't making a good choice. It's like I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know what I was doing. That's because you weren't thinking about how your spouse would respond to this. You're thinking about how you would respond to this. And so once you get out of the ability to think selflessly, everything that you do can be justified when you're in a selfishness mode. Make sense? Oh, the common denominator behind all sin is selfishness. James chapter 1, verse 13. Where there's selfish ambition, every evil thing exists. And so, that's the common denominator behind all sin. So let's look at Ephesians 4. If you start out in Ephesians 4:1, you're going to get the first in a series of walk passages. Now, I want you to walk worthy of the calling. And he talks about unity as a calling. So this is how the church is unified. And he does some systemic stuff when he talks about the head body and how we all make the same contributions to each other. And then he gets all the way down to verse 25. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one another. In your anger, do not sin, and do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Anyone who's been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. And do not let any unwholesome words come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with all forms of malice, and be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. So, what does that tell us about forgiveness? It's hard work. What else does it tell us? Hey, we're forgiven, so we should forgive somebody else. You know, when you start thinking about, does this person deserve my forgiveness? It's not about deserve. By the way, that's a Clint Eastwood line. But the idea is, God forgives me, so who am I to withhold forgiveness from you? And I know there's a debate in some of our circles that if somebody damages you or hurts you or sins against you, you're not obligated to forgive them unless they ask you. And I just think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But now, again, I may not be able to defend it in a debate with anybody, but, you know, Jesus says based on how you forgive other people, God's going to forgive you. Well, I've decided I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to initiate good in my forgiveness because, I don't want God to be holding an account against me because I wouldn't forgive you. And so look at this mindset that takes place in this interaction. The first thing that he talks about is you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to each other. Now, how does that fit in with forgiveness? Okay, if you're going to lie about what's going on, you're never going to get forgiveness. Or if I lie to myself about who you are and what you are, I'm never going to forgive you. If I vilify you and paint you as the evil person, if I paint you with negative sentiment override, if I'm always contemptuous, he always, she never, every time if I look at you through a viewed filter, I'm not going to convince myself that our marriage is worth getting any forgiveness because I think it's broke anyway. You know, couples come in all the time and they want to just, come to the principal's office and tell on each other and tell how bad everybody's acting. And once they describe how terrible things are, I go, what are you trying to save? I mean, if it's that miserable, shoot up in here amongst us. One of us has got to have some relief. I just can't imagine. And so if you're only harboring, this person's always hated me, always hurted me, always wanted to do bad things, that's not really true. Sometimes I misbehave. It's because I'm imperfect. Sometimes I misbehave, and it's not because I'm evil. I'm stupid. Sometimes I misbehave, and I'm either immature or get overwhelmed and become selfish. Well, if I can give you grace to say, well, that's an imperfect person living up to their potential for imperfection, I can kind of get past that. But if I hold you to an unrealistic standard and don't ever expect to ever have to forgive you, I'm not thinking about you in honest and true ways. Because I don't know anybody that's perfect, right? And yet we get into a marriage, and the first mistake, the first disappointment, the first regrettable event, and we're ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so the first thing is, let's look at each other honestly, and let's be truthful. Sometimes I hurt you, and I didn't mean to. Sometimes I hurt you, and it's not because I'm evil; it's because I'm weak. Sometimes I hurt you, and it's not because it's excusable. I'm just an imperfect, sinful person. And if I look at your behavior based in a different context than you intentionally tried to hurt me, does that make it easier to forgive? Yes, no, maybe. You think about when I understand where you're coming from, sometimes I understand the context for your behavior. That make sense? So, put off falsehood and be truthful about who you are and about what you've done and about who they are. And then in your anger, do not sin, and do not let the sun go down upon your wrath, and do not give the devil a foothold. What does that have to do with forgiveness? Okay, so if you're not forgiving, your Heavenly Father's not going to forgive you. And if I decide that I can go to bed and harbor these grudges and in my anger I can let it open the door for sin, it doesn't say you can't be angry. You know, I'm not the best person to teach grammar, you know, but hey, Lonnie, that be angry and do not sin, that's in the imperative voice. Well, you look at a box of TNT, it says handle with care. That's in the imperative voice too. But it doesn't mean you get out and play community watch football with it. Okay? It says if you get this off the shelf, what do you do with it? You hold it very carefully. You don't jostle it, you don't bounce it. So if I'm going to be angry, I got to make sure that when I get the anger box off the shelf, I'm not going to let that thing blow up. I can be angry and it not lead me into sin. So being angry is okay as long as it doesn't dictate your actions and lead you down. So be angry and don't sin, and then don't let the sun go down on your wrath. That means I'm not going to take these things that are resentful or regrettable and harbor them. I'm not going to be a collector of unfinished business. I don't want the sun to go down upon my wrath. Why? Because it gives the devil a foothold. Now, anybody understand what that passage means, to give the devil a foothold? Very close. I wished it was a good rock climbing illustration. But the idea of, think about capturing territory as you climb, because it's actually a military term. So, you know, you send, you know, a ranger battalion in, and they secure a beachhead. They build a camp. Well, once they get that camp dug in, they'll send out patrols. And when they send out patrols, what do? They clear more jungle, they build another camp. And then what do they do from that camp? Forward operating base. They send out another patrol. And so once you let the sun go down upon your wrath, like the first foothold or the first handhold in climbing, this is a military base. You're giving the devil a place to start operations, and he moves from either your thoughts to your heart, to your mouth, to your actions, or he moves from your hearts to your thought, to your mouth, and your actions. And although the climbing illustration is pretty accurate, the real idea of giving the devil a foothold is about don't let him set up a camp that he can operate from and invade other territory. And so when I refuse to forgive you, who am I letting camp out in my thoughts? When I refuse to forgive you, who am I letting camp out in my mind? When I refuse to forgive you, who am I letting camp out in my heart? So I'm allowing the devil to establish a base of operations, and from that single base of operation, he can send out patrols and start taking over territory. And so once I decide that I'm going to change the way I think about what you've done that was unfortunate, then as a person who's the perpetrator of the unfortunate, what's the next step? He gives this example about a guy who's stealing. What does he say there? If you're a person who's stealing, what should you do? Stop stealing. What's the next thing you should do? Hey, get a job. Be honest. And then instead of taking from other people, you have extra stuff to give people. The easiest question you can ask a spouse or a couple in counseling is, what would your spouse tell you that you need to do different to make the marriage work? It's easy to say, what would you tell your spouse? But this is, do you know what we already know what we're doing. A lot of times that make our spouses unhappy. So what would you say your spouse would say that you need to do? Well, that's when you go, oh, I've been stealing, I need to quit, I need to get a job, and I need to give money. Because that ownership, and all of us want our marriages to be different if the other person changes their behavior. Guess whose behavior you can change? That's it. And so when I recognize, hey, these are the things I'm doing that's not working, and I change them, once I start changing behavior, what does that incline you to do when it comes to forgiveness? Yeah, because I'm changing my behavior. I've not only asked for forgiveness, but I've repented, and you can see me doing something differently. It makes forgiveness more conducive because I actually trust this person now. I'm rebuilding that level of trust. I think I heard one bell, and so let's just notice that once you start changing the way you talk or think about each other, verses 29 all the way down to verse 32 talks about how we interact with each other. If I forgive you, or I treat you as if you are forgiven, I don't talk about you in unwholesome ways. I only say things to you that are helpful and building you up according to your needs. I'm going to remove, verse 31, bitterness, anger, rage, wrath, brawling, slander, and every kind of malice. And then I'm going to be kind and compassionate to you and forgiving you, just as God in Christ forgave me. And so once I decide that I'm going to be a person of forgiveness, I can't talk about you in those terms where I describe that regrettable thing that you did. I can't camp out. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean it didn't hurt in the first place. It doesn't mean it was right. It doesn't mean it should have been done. It doesn't mean you were just, but it just simply changes the way I start viewing you, and oftentimes just simply changing the context by saying, hey, this was in our past. We're looking at a different future. You can't get there till you leave the past and make peace with the present. Does that make sense? All right, any other questions or comments on forgiveness? Next week, we'll talk about accepting influence from our spouse, which ought to be a lot of fun. Jackie grinned like a Cheshire cat. And so we'll see how that goes. Thank you guys for coming, and enjoy your weekend.